The fall of the Mantua fortress dramatically changed the situation on the front. Now the French army wasn't held back by anything, and Bonaparte could fully plan the offensive actions. Since that time, the Italian front has been completely defined as the main one, and the members of the Directory sent Italy large reinforcements without any doubts. 2 divisions were heading to help Bonaparte in the first echelon, headed by Bernadotte and Dilmas. The total number of reinforcements sent to Italy was about 30,000 men. However, Bonaparte didn't waste time while waiting for the reinforcements. A division of General Victor consisting of 8,000 men immediately moved to the Papal States after the seizure of the Mantua fortress to deal with the Pope and force him into a truce. On February 2nd, the Pope's troops tried to stop the French advancement, but were crushed in their very first battle. The soldiers of Pope Pius VI were so frightened that they didn't even think of resisting. Pope Pius VI promptly acknowledged the futility of resisting, and in Tolentino on February 19th, he finally signed the truce agreement, agreeing to Bonaparte's conditions. In addition to the contribution of 30 million francs, Pope Pius VI also gave the French his most valuable territories, including Bologna and Modena. He also closed all the seaports of the Papal States to the English vessels and refused all the unions directed against the French Republic. I am 3 days from Rome. I will return to the army as soon as I finish negotiations with the Pope. Pius VI saves Rome, yielding us his richest possessions. This agreement will give us material resources for a great campaign. Thus, all the issues with Pope Pius VI were successfully dealt with, and Bonaparte aimed all his efforts at his main enemy. By mid-February, the reinforcements sent by the Directory started arriving in Italy. In addition, volunteers kept on enrolling in the army. Not only Italians were among them. Polish patriots who dreamt of the restoration of their country decided to join the French and fight against the Imperials. General Dombrowski arrived in Italy to help Bonaparte form the Polish legions. The Polish people, hope unites us. France is winning. It fights for the cause of all nations. Friends, Polish legions are created in Italy, so let us unite the ranks of those who fight for the common cause of the peoples, for freedom under the command of valiant Bonaparte. And one day, our fellow countrymen will meet us in our motherland, which we once left in tears. Meanwhile, despite a difficult situation on the front, the Austrian government didn't want to negotiate and started gathering another army, entrusting command to its best commander, Archduke Karl. Having arrived at Innsbruck on February 6th, he actively started organizing an army. Bonaparte had immense respect for his enemy and, despite outnumbering him, planned his offensive with maximal discretion. The Directory, as before, thought it would be worth starting an offensive in Italy if and when Moreau's army could force the Rhine River. Bonaparte didn't agree with this plan. He wasn't going to wait for anybody, because in the case of any delay, the French could lose the advantages they gained after the victory in the Battle of Rivoli. By the end of February, Archduke Karl was only able to gather 35,000 soldiers. However, the Austrians didn't stop mobilization, and in the next 2 months, the number of men in the Austrian army would rise to 60,000. Therefore, everything spoke in favor of an early offensive, and Bonaparte, not waiting for additional instructions from the Directory, on March 10th ordered to start the attack. General Joubert, in charge of the corps of 19,000 soldiers, which consisted of 3 divisions, moved to Tyrol to ensure this sector's safety at the front. The task assigned to General Joubert became more difficult because, in any case, the French couldn't afford to provoke the local population to start a guerrilla war. The soldiers were again reminded that for any material or physical damage to the locals, they would immediately be arrested and shot. Meanwhile, the main corps, consisting of 30,000 soldiers led by Bonaparte, was moving toward the Tagliamento River. This place had the Austrians' main line of defense, where they focused the main part of the army. The main force's left flank was covered by Masséna's division, which headed north for Bassano. In an emergency, this division could promptly help in any sector of the front. About 60,000 men in total were involved in Bonaparte's offensive. Archduke Karl had no more than 35,000 soldiers in the line of defense. However, if he could hold on for 3 or 4 weeks, he would be able to increase the number of soldiers in his army significantly. Thus, on March 16th, Bonaparte's divisions approached the Tagliamento River after having thrown back the enemy's vanguards. The water level in the river hadn't risen too much yet, making it possible for the French to wade across it, and Bonaparte, without delays, sent his divisions ahead. Archduke Karl attempted several counterattacks, but that didn't stop the advancing columns. The French significantly outnumbered Austrians, and commanders showed exceptional tactical skills. All maneuvers were carried out in strict order and with amazing accuracy. Eventually, after several hours of fighting, Bernadotte's division seized the enemy foothold on the opposite bank of the river, and all Austrian hopes to stop Bonaparte in his advancement vanished. Having lost 500 men and 6 cannons, Archduke Karl was forced to retreat. Masséna was also advancing with the same success. Having crushed Lusignan's division, he forced the Tagliamento River and started threatening the Austrian army's right flank. Thus, having crossed the river, the French continued to mercilessly pursue the Austrians, inflicting heavy losses. On March 18th, the French captured the powerful fortress of Palmanova. Bonaparte then sent Bernadotte's division to Laibach. Meanwhile, with the rest of his troops, he went to Tarvis to seize an important mountain pass, which opened the way to Klagenfurt. The Austrians also acknowledged the importance of this position and invested all of their efforts in the protection of this mountain pass. From March 19th to March 23rd, very fierce battles were ongoing on these mountain heights. Archduke Karl tried his best to hold Tarvis, but the French were unstoppable. Having crushed Bialic's division, Bonaparte's soldiers broke through the mountains and, on March 29th, entered Klagenfurt. Having lost all hope of stopping the French, the Austrians started to retreat in all directions. Archduke Karl had lost over 10,000 men since March 16th. All this time, the citizens of Vienna were in huge panic. The city authorities started preparing for an immediate evacuation to Prague. However, later events took an unexpected turn. As soon as Bonaparte arrived at Klagenfurt, he received a letter from the Directory which said that the French troops on the Rhine were still on the left bank of the river and that he could not expect prompt help from Moreau's army. In this position, it was highly risky to advance to Vienna because the powers that Bonaparte had at the time were clearly not enough to capture the enemy's capital. At the same time, Bonaparte wasn't going to stand still and wait until Moreau's army arrived. On March 31st, Bonaparte sent a letter from Klagenfurt to Archduke Karl, in which he offered to stop the bloodshed and finally start peace negotiations. Mr. Commander-in-Chief, brave soldiers fight in this war, but they want peace. Isn't this war going on for 6 long years now? Haven't enough lives been destroyed? Hasn't it produced enough evil and suffering for humanity? I hear from all sides calls to peace. Europe, which raised its weapons against the French Republic, has already put them down. Only your nation alone remains standing, but there will be much more bloodshed. Whatever the outcome, we will kill tens of thousands of people. Wouldn't it be better to end it all in a peace accord? Everything must have its limit, even hatred. As for me, Mr. Commander-in-Chief, if this offer that I am honored to make saves even one life, I will be more proud of that achievement than I am proud of all sorrowful glory that I received on the battlefield. Archduke Karl responded to Bonaparte that since he was not authorized to negotiate the end of the war, he must refuse the truce offer. Under these circumstances, to pressure the Austrians and force them to consider peace, Bonaparte made a swift march to Leoben, which he took on April 7th. The French army was now only 90 miles from Vienna. Also, Bonaparte ordered the rest of his divisions to concentrate in Klagenfurt. Such decisive actions by Bonaparte were highly convincing, and on that very same day, the Austrian parliamentarians arrived at Leoben and asked to stop the war actions. Bonaparte didn't wait for a Directory representative and held negotiations on behalf of the French Republic on his own. The Directory was very dissatisfied with Bonaparte's overly high independence, but it couldn't do much about it. Eventually, on April 18th, during very complex negotiations in Leoben, the parties signed an agreement to stop the war actions. In this agreement, they put Bonaparte's demands for preliminary conditions, which would be the basis for the future peace agreement. According to them, the Austrians had to cede all their possessions in the Netherlands to the French, as well as those on the left bank of the Rhine River, which were de facto controlled by the French. In addition, the Austrians acknowledged the Cisalpine Republic created by Bonaparte, which was tightly connected to France with Union treaties, as well as the Ligurian Republic. As compensation, the Austrians received nearly all of the Republic of Venice's territories except for the Ionian Islands, which were ceded to France. Thus, all the war actions were stopped, but the negotiations on the final approval of the truce conditions continued for several months. All this time, Bonaparte stayed in Italy and lived in the luxurious palace of Mombello near Milano. For a while, Lombardy was perceived as the center of Europe. Many politicians, diplomats, bankers, and secular ladies arrived there. Bonaparte also welcomed various renowned scientists into his palace, including mathematician Monge and chemist Berthollet. So frequently, besides banquets and feasts, the evenings were filled with conversations with scientists. Finally, on October 18, 1797, the peace conditions offered by Bonaparte were approved, and near the village of Campo Formio, they signed the peace treaty that ended the war on the European continent. It was the end of Bonaparte's legendary First Italian Campaign. On December 7th, Napoleon Bonaparte brought a long-awaited peace treaty to Paris, and the Directory in full solemnly met him in the Luxembourg Palace. A significant number of people gathered near the palace to see the young general in person. In less than a year, he had brought an exemplary Austrian army to its knees and brought peace to France. The time when the young republic is achieving these victories over ancient despotism is a great and splendid era for Europe. For Napoleon, it was the purest, most brilliant period of his life. In just 1 year, leading a tiny army that lacked everything, he pushed the Austrians from the Mediterranean coast to the Carinthian mountains, scattered and destroyed all the armies that the Austrian ruling house sent one after another to Italy, and granted peace to the European continent. None of the commanders of the ancient or modern world have achieved so many great victories in such a short time, with such limited resources, and against such a powerful adversary. In 1 year, a young man of just 26 years old eclipsed such commanders as Alexander the Great, Caesar, Hannibal, and Frederick the Great.